A 4,500-year-old clay tablet, rectangular and slightly thicker than most documents of its period, sits in the Yale Babylonian Collection in New Haven, Connecticut. Catalog number YBC 6438. Most visitors to the collection never see it. The tablet is held in research storage, not on public display. It is part of the same Yale collection that houses YBC 11304, the Moon Interior Tablet, and YBC 9832, the Journey to the Edge of the World Tablet. Among scholars, YBC 6438 is known as a geographical text. The cuneiform identifies it as a list of locations, with each location described according to a specific feature. The standard interpretation has been that the tablet is a list of sacred sites within the broader region the Sumerians knew, places where certain religious or ritual conditions were maintained. The 5 entries each begin with a coordinate notation and end with a description of what the location is known for. The descriptions are unusual. Each of the 5 locations is described as a place where the cuneiform construction for the passage of time does not apply. Not slowed, not altered, not extended, does not apply. The Sumerian phrase has been interpreted as poetic, a reference to the timelessness associated with sacred space. Dr. Kara Lindgren, examining the grammatical mood in 2023, found that the construction was not poetic. It was technical. It was the same construction the Sumerians used in administrative records to indicate that a normal process was not operating at the location described. The 5 places were not poetically timeless. They were places where time, in the sense the Sumerians used the word, did not function, and each location is described as having an occupant. The cuneiform names what waits at each. The tablet was acquired by Yale in 1923 from the antiquities market in Baghdad. Its find spot is not documented, though the script and dialect place its composition in southern Mesopotamia in the early 2nd millennium BCE. The tablet was catalogued upon acquisition as a religious geographical text, miscellaneous category, and placed in research storage. It was studied in the 1970s by scholars interested in Mesopotamian sacred geography, who used it as evidence of how the Sumerians classified ritual sites within their landscape. The temporal claims on the tablet were noted in this scholarship, but were interpreted as theological assertions about the sacredness of the locations, comparable to claims made in many ancient cultures, about places where the divine touches the mundane. The interpretation entered the academic record and was not revisited. The locations were assumed to be sacred sites understood by the Sumerians within their religious framework, not actual locations with measurable temporal anomalies. Dr. Kara Lindgren at the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago accessed digital images of YBC 6438 in 2023 during a project on Sumerian descriptive vocabulary for non-standard physical conditions, the terms the Sumerians used for situations in which the normal operation of natural processes was disrupted. The vocabulary on YBC 6438 appeared in every entry. Lindgren noted that the cuneiform construction the standard scholarship had translated as a poetic reference to sacred timelessness was the same construction used in administrative records to indicate, for example, that a river was not flowing at its normal rate, that a furnace was not producing heat at the expected temperature, or that a stored grain supply was not deteriorating at the expected speed. The construction was operational, not theological. The 5 entries described 5 locations where time-related processes did not run normally. Lindgren published her vocabulary analysis in the Journal of Near Eastern Studies in 2024. The academic response was silence. No rebuttal, no follow-up study, no engagement with the operational reading. The paper exists. The 5 locations exist in the published record. To understand what Lindgren found, it helps to read the 5 entries as the tablet sets them out. The first location is identified by coordinates corresponding to a region in the upper reaches of the Zagros Mountains in what is now western Iran. The cuneiform describes the first location as the place where the lights do not change. The phrase has been read as a reference to a constant level of illumination, possibly an underground chamber or a location with stable atmospheric conditions. Lindgren reads it differently. The Sumerian word the standard translation renders as lights is the same word used elsewhere for the positions of stars and the apparent motion of the sun. The phrase in the operational reading indicates that at the first location, the stars and the sun do not appear to move. The first location is described as occupied by what the tablet calls the keeper of the constant sky. an entity that has remained at the location since before the Sumerians' own records began, and that the cuneiform describes as the witness to what was here before the present arrangement. The second location is identified by coordinates corresponding to a region in the Syrian desert, in a depression that the tablet describes as below the level of the surrounding terrain, by approximately the distance of a day's march downward. The cuneiform describes the second location as the place where the body does not weary. The phrase has been read as a reference to a refreshing sacred site. Lindgren reads it operationally. The body does not weary at the second location because the body's metabolic processes operate at a different rate than they do outside the location. Time, as the body experiences it through hunger, thirst, fatigue, and aging, does not pass at the same rate within the second location's boundary. The second location is described as occupied by what the cuneiform calls the one who learned not to age, a being who is described as having been entered the location voluntarily an unknown duration ago, and who has, by remaining within the location, persisted to the time of the tablet's inscription. The third location is identified by coordinates corresponding to a region in the Anatolian Plateau, in what is now central Turkey, at an elevation the cuneiform describes as the high place where two valleys meet. The cuneiform describes the third location as the place where the dead do not finish dying. The phrase has been read as a reference to a sacred burial ground, where the dead remained in a state between life and the afterlife. Lindgren reads it operationally. The dead at the third location do not finish dying because the biological processes of decomposition do not operate within the location's boundary. Bodies placed in the third location remain in the condition they were in when they were brought there. The third location is described as occupied by what the cuneiform calls the one who tends what does not change, a being whose function is described as overseeing the preserved bodies and ensuring that they remain in their conditions across the duration of the location's effect. The fourth location is identified by coordinates corresponding to a region beneath the Mediterranean Sea, in an area that was dry land before the rise in sea level at the end of the most recent ice age. The cuneiform describes the fourth location as the place where the going does not become the having gone. The phrase has been read as a reference to a sacred site where journeys were undertaken but never completed. Lindgren reads it operationally. Events at the fourth location do not transition from present action to completed past. Whatever begins at the fourth location continues, in some sense, to be ongoing, without proceeding to its conclusion. The fourth location is described as occupied by what the cuneiform calls the one who acts without finishing, a being whose function the tablet does not fully describe, but whose activities are described as having been continuous from before the location was submerged. The fifth location is described differently from the first four. The cuneiform does not give coordinates for the fifth location. The fifth location is identified instead by a description of how to find it. The fifth location is described as the place that appears only when sought by those who do not know they are seeking it, and that withdraws from those who pursue it intentionally. The cuneiform indicates that the fifth location is not a fixed point on the Earth's surface. It is a condition that arises at varying locations under specific circumstances. The circumstances are not fully specified. The tablet indicates that the fifth location has been encountered by Sumerian travelers and travelers of earlier cultures, and that those who have entered it have described it as a place where time does not pass in the most complete sense of any of the five locations. The fifth location is described as occupied by what the cuneiform calls the one who waits for those who wander in, a being whose function is to receive those who arrive at the fifth location and to determine what is to be done with them. The Atrahasis, the Babylonian flood narrative held in the British Museum, contains a passage describing locations on the earth where the gods had placed certain conditions that the flood was not permitted to disturb. The standard interpretation treats this as mythological background. Lindgren re-examined it. The Atrahasis text specifies that the protected locations were 5 in number, that they were maintained across the flood without alteration, and that they remained operational after the flood ended. The new detail here is continuity. The Babylonian text confirms that the 5 locations on YBC 6438 were not lost in the events that destroyed most of the pre-flood world. They survived by the design of the deities who established them, and they continued to function in the post-flood era. The locations have persisted continuously from the period before recorded history to the period of the tablet's inscription, and the tablet provides no indication that the persistence has ended. The Egyptian conception of certain sacred sites includes references to locations called the Chambers of the Unaging, places where pharaohs and selected officials were sometimes sent for periods of religious retreat. The new detail here is documentation. The Egyptian records indicate that individuals who entered the chambers of the unaging for prescribed durations returned to their normal duties without showing the signs of aging that would have been expected over the duration of their retreat. The records have been read as religious symbolism. Lindgren notes that the Egyptian descriptions match the operational characteristics of the second location on YBC 6438, the place where the body does not weary. The Egyptian chambers may have been the second location, or sites with similar properties. The Hopi tradition documented by Frank Waters in 1963 includes a teaching about places the Hopi call the still places, locations where the conditions of the surrounding world do not reach. The new detail here is danger. The Hopi tradition specifies that the still places are not safe to enter, despite their apparent peacefulness, because those who enter and remain too long find that they cannot leave. The conditions that hold time still within the location also hold the visitor still. To stay long enough in a still place is to become one of the things that waits there. The Hopi tradition matches the structural framework of YBC 6438 closely. Modern reports of locations where time appears to behave anomalously have been cataloged across the past century in various forms. The reports cluster into recognizable categories. Reports of locations where visitors emerge to find that more or less time has passed in the outside world than they experienced. Reports of locations where bodies, organic materials, or evidence of past events appear to be preserved beyond their expected lifespan. Reports of locations from which travelers do not return. Reports of locations that visitors cannot relocate when they attempt to return, despite remembering the path. The reports come from individuals across many cultures, many decades, and many religious and non-religious orientations. The structural features of the reports map onto the 5 categories on YBC 6438, with a consistency that the conventional explanation that the reports are independent cultural projections of disorientation has not accounted for. Here is what keeps researchers up at night. The first 4 locations on the tablet are given with coordinate notations that, while not precise by modern standards, are specific enough to identify the regions to which they refer. The Zagros Mountains, the Syrian Desert Depression, the Anatolian Plateau High Meeting Point, the Drowned Mediterranean Basin. These are real regions of the Earth that are still present and accessible to varying degrees in the modern era. The 5th location is not coordinate fixed and may therefore not be a single place but a recurring condition. The 4 coordinate fixed locations by the tablet's grammatical framing continue to operate. The keeper of the constant sky has not been relieved. The one who learned not to age has not aged. The one who tends what does not change continues to tend. The one who acts without finishing has not finished. The waiting that the tablet describes is, in the framing of the cuneiform, ongoing now. The 5th location waits at variable points for travelers who do not know they are heading toward it. YBC 6438 sits in the research collection of the Yale Babylonian Collection today. It is not on public display. Dr. Lindgren offers a translation of the final line of the tablet that differs from the standard reading. The final line, after the 5 locations are described, has been translated for decades as "may the places remain where they are," a benediction. Lindgren reads the verb form as a continuous present rather than an optative. The line is not a wish. The line reads, "The places remain where they are, and those who wait in them continue to wait." Continue to wait. The first waits in constancy. Constancy. The second waits without aging. Without aging. The third waits among what does not change. Does not change. The 4th waits without finishing. Without finishing. And the 5th waits for those who do not yet know they are coming. Do not yet know.